Erdogan and Putin have a complicated relationship. And for the last few years, the Turkish president has tried to balance being a NATO member against relatively warm relations with his Russian counterpart, with him often towing a middle line between Putin and the West. Obviously though, the war in Ukraine has strained this strategy, with Turkey coming under increasing pressure to take a side. And in the last week or so, Erdogan has done a couple of things which begin to suggest that he's basically decided to give up on Putin. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Russo-Turkish relationship going into this conflict, how the war in Ukraine has put that under strain, and what might have motivated Erdogan's westwards shift. This video is brought to you by our new show, The Daily Briefing. That's the show where we run through the 5 most important news stories each day, giving you a rundown of everything you need to know about from around the world in just a matter of minutes. Watch the show on the separate TLDR Daily YouTube channel or listen along by searching in your favorite podcast app. Okay, so the first thing we should say on this topic is that we've actually done another video on Turkey's relationship with Russia in the past. So if you want to know more about that, and in particular the history behind it, then I'd recommend going and watching that video first. But in this video, we're going to start in the aftermath of the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey, which is when Erdogan and Putin's relationship really kicks off. For those of you who don't know, in July 2016, a faction within the Turkish military attempted an anti-Erdogan coup, citing an erosion of democracy and secularism as the reasons for the uprising. According to Erdogan and the government, the coup was led by Fethullah Gulen, an Islamic scholar and former Erdogan ally who helped Erdogan and his AKP party win power for the first time in the 2000s. But that was before the two began falling out in the 2010s and things began to go sour. In the end though, Erdogan defeated the coup, in part by literally FaceTiming CNN Turkey and telling his supporters to resist the coup on the streets. Anyway, Europe and the US were only half-hearted in their criticism of the coup, both because they were sympathetic to the idea that Erdogan's Islamic-tinted authoritarianism was eroding Turkish democracy, but also because they were unconvinced by Erdogan's claim that the whole thing was masterminded by Gulen. So Western countries were a bit concerned by the resulting purge after the coup, which saw some 77,000 people arrested and another 160,000 fired for alleged connections with Gulen. Both German and British intelligence services expressed doubt about Erdogan's accusations, and the European Commissioner dealing with Turkey's EU membership bid said that Turkey had pre-prepared an arrest list of political opponents, which certainly looks suspicious. And while Obama said that the US supported Erdogan's government, Erdogan accused the head of the US's Central Command of, quote, siding with the coup plotters, after he criticized the Turkish government for arresting the Pentagon's contacts in Turkey. Also, notably, the US have refused to extradite Gulen, who's lived in Pennsylvania since 1999. Now, Putin's approach was very different and stood out from the West's mixture of reactions to the coup. That's because Putin was unrestrained in his support for Erdogan. The Russian president called Erdogan out of solidarity before any other NATO leader, and there were even reports that Russian security services sanctioned in nearby Syria tipped off the Turkish government in advance of the coup, probably saving Erdogan's life. Before 2016 though, Erdogan and Putin hadn't got on so well. And just a year beforehand, Turkish fighter jets shot down a Russian Su-24 in the Turkey-Syria border area, culminating in a public apology in June 2016. In fact, the 2 Turkish pilots involved in the confrontation were actually arrested as part of the post-coup purge, in a move that was widely perceived as a gesture of respect to Putin. Now, in some sense, Putin and Erdogan were always natural allies. They're both strong men who've held on to power for the best part of 2 decades, and ambitions to rebuild regional spheres of influence, and they both experience strained relationships with the West thanks to their authoritarian and expansionist tendencies. It's not just that their personalities match up either. The 2 countries also have deep economic links. While Turkey was only Russia's fifth largest trading partner in 2019, Russia was Turkey's second largest after the EU, with bilateral trade totaling 23 billion euros. Russia is also Turkey's main energy supplier, with Turkey historically importing about 50% of its gas from Russia. For Russia, Turkey is not only a major export partner for oil and gas in its own right, but also an important transit country for gas supplies to southeastern Europe via the Turk Stream. Nonetheless, though, it was ultimately the events of 2016 that got this relationship started, and it continued to improve as Turkey's relations with other NATO countries deteriorated in the late 2010s. Erdogan was openly bitter about the fact that NATO sent extra troops to Lithuania in order to deter Russian aggression in 2017, but refused to send troops to help Turkey when it decided to go into Syria in 2016, nominally to defeat the terrorist threat posed by ISIS. And that's not the end of the tensions either, because Turkey's increasing belligerence in the Mediterranean and Aegean strained its relations with Greece, a fellow NATO member, and ultimately caused France and Greece to sign a bilateral military agreement squarely aimed at confronting Turkey's maritime expansionism. And various other Western countries have imposed at least partial arms embargoes on Turkey over the last few years, including the UK, France, Germany, Canada, and Sweden, in response to their intervention in northern Syria in 2019. All in all, though, Putin's clearly enjoyed using his strong relations with Erdogan to drive a wedge between NATO countries, while Erdogan's used his relations with Putin to pursue a foreign policy independent of NATO, which just plays better with his domestic political audience. But as we mentioned, in recent months things have become a lot more difficult, despite Erdogan attempting to maintain his middle ground. Back at the beginning, the Turkish president was even hesitant to describe Putin's invasion as a war, and has so far refused to impose any sanctions on Russia, as well as positioning himself as a potential mediator between both sides. However, with political pressure building over the last couple of weeks, it looks like Erdogan's begun to shift away from Putin. Last week, for example, Erdogan suddenly dropped his opposition to Swedish and Finnish accession into NATO, something that Putin clearly isn't happy about. Then, over the weekend, Turkish forces detained a Russian cargo ship possessing grain that was presumably stolen from Ukraine. Now, while Turkey has since claimed that it's not 100% sure who the grain belongs to, this is still a notable shift, given that satellite images previously suggested that Turkey was happily accepting grain shipments from Ukraine via Crimea. So why is this? Why has Erdogan apparently turned on Putin? Well, as we see it, there are three reasons. Firstly, tensions over northern Syria. That's because in 2020, Putin and Erdogan negotiated a ceasefire between the Russian-backed Assad regime and the Turkish-backed rebels in Idlib. Unfortunately, though, this ceasefire has repeatedly ruptured since. And just last month, Erdogan announced plans for yet another Turkish intervention in the region, which didn't go down well with Putin. The second reason that Turkey might be turning their back on Russia, though, is that after Russia's military performance and sanctions, it's unlikely that Turkey still considers Russia to be a reliable arms exporter, which makes the chances of another S-400 debacle much less likely. But third, and most importantly, the war in Ukraine has reinvigorated NATO, and while it was fine to play both sides when NATO was considered to be brain dead, the alliance's newfound significance has made it harder for Erdogan to have his cake and eat it. Ultimately, it's too soon to tell which side Erdogan will fall down on. But if you want to be updated on this story as it plays out, then you should check out the Daily Briefing. That's our daily show where we explain 5 news stories every single day. We pick the big stories, the ones you need to know about, as well as some smaller ones that you might have otherwise missed. So if you want to be better informed about the world around you and news from all over the globe, then you really ought to subscribe. And it's only a few minutes each day, so what do you have to lose? We post a video version every weekday over on the TLDR Daily YouTube channel, so you can subscribe over there. Or you can listen along to the podcast by searching for the TLDR Daily Briefing in your favorite podcast app. Thanks for your support, and I hope you enjoy the show.